in the Maldives, sandbanks like this appear and disappear, and that really influences the way that the people live and adapt.
Can you hear the sounds of the wildebeest?
It's everywhere, isn't it? 3D sound.
Yes.
Something you can't get anywhere else. It's just beautiful.
Any kind of weather problems that you can imagine, we got them here. We have earthquakes, we have tsunami.
Let's hope we have none of those things today, right?
Almost all the pine honey in the world comes from this little corner of Turkey.
We are Madagascar! We are Madagascar!
A lot of black people think they cannot go to the water for surfing, and they can do it. Everybody can surf it. Everybody can do it. Everybody can surf.
Inspiring travel on the BBC.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump arrives back in court in New York, where his lawyers are preparing to question Stormy Daniels in the hush money trial.
I'm live outside the court in New York, where tense questioning is already underway as the woman at the center of this case denies she was after Trump's money.
As fighting reportedly edges closer to the centre of Rafah, a member of Israel's government condemns the US decision to pause the supply of weapons. President Vladimir Putin marks Russia's annual Victory Day celebration with a warning to the West that he will not tolerate any threats. This is the scene live in Malmö in Sweden, where hours away from a Eurovision final, pro-Palestinian protests are taking place.
Yeah!
And a British toddler who was born deaf becomes the first person in the world to receive a groundbreaking gene therapy treatment. Hello, I'm Geeta, Guru-Murthy. Donald Trump is back in court in Manhattan, where he's likely to start the day listening to more testimony from the woman at the centre of the fraud charges he's facing. The adult film actress Stormy Daniels is expected to be in the witness stand again. In fact, she is already on the stand, giving the court some rather salacious details this week so far about the affair that she claims she had with Mr. Trump before he became president. He's denied her version of events. Well, the fraud charges stem from alleged hush money payments which were made to Ms. Daniels. Here's what he has had to say about the court case.
Here we sit after 2.5 weeks, and I think you'll see some very revealing things today, and I want to thank my lawyers. They've done a very good job, but I'd rather thank them after it's over as opposed to now, because we don't want them to get carried away.
Well, let's get the latest from Neda Tawfik, our North America correspondent. And Neda, just bring us up to date with what we know is going on inside the courtroom.
Yeah, well, look, Geeta, we already know that Donald Trump has been affected by Stormy Daniels' testimony because in court transcripts that were released after the last day in court, you could read that the judge had to essentially give Donald Trump's lawyers a warning that Donald Trump had to stop audibly cursing during Stormy Daniels' first bit of testimony. He said that the jury could see it and hear it. It could be contemptuous, showing perhaps intimidation of a witness. So he ordered Donald Trump's lawyer to advise him to cut that out. And Geeta, Donald Trump arriving in court today brought with him some political allies. A senator from Florida who is loyal to Donald Trump, Rick Scott, is joining him there in the courtroom along with some of his campaign team and lawyers who are normally with him. So Donald Trump certainly bracing for another what we expect to be a difficult day in court for him as Stormy Daniels continues her testimony. Now, so far, Donald Trump's lawyers have tried to discredit Stormy Daniels completely by claiming that she was just after money when she wanted to sell her story of the alleged affair. Daniels on the stand insisting it was about keeping her family safe and just getting the story out. They even tried to suggest that she screamed at her lawyer at the time when payment was being held up before the election. But again, on the stand this morning, she denies that characterization, that account, sticking to her story that she had on Tuesday, again, that this had nothing to do with getting money from Donald Trump.
Neda Tawfik, thanks very much indeed. Well, I'm joined now by Lauren Wright, who's a political scientist at Princeton University. Thank you for your time. This is more than just a salacious court case. I mean, the interesting question behind this, given this election year, this pivotal year for the US, is whether swing voters in swing states could be affected in who they vote for by this case. Do we have any evidence on that yet?
And it is, to be sure, a very salacious court case, and it is historic, and it's important to cover it. What we know from the past is that these independent voters who lean Republican, that Donald Trump is at very high risk of alienating and not getting back in the fold. They're Nikki Haley voters, essentially, and they were Kasich voters in 2016 or Marco Rubio voters in 2016. The majority of those people do ultimately come home and support the party's nominee. And so it really is a question of what's in the news closer to the election when nominee. And so it really is a question of what's in the news closer to the election when more people are paying attention. If these court cases get delayed, maybe Trump will look out. If the college campuses protests continue, that's not good for Democrats. And so it really depends on the mix of news voters will be exposed to when they head to the ballot box.
OK, so this is obviously some months out from that November vote. Is there any polling at all out there on, for example, whether there's a different reaction to what we're seeing with this particular case, Stormy Daniels, between, for example, male and female voters or young and old voters?
Male and female voters, I have not seen big differences in particular. And, you know, men and women voters are more alike than different, frankly. There are certainly a lot of women Republicans who turned back around and voted for Donald Trump in 2020, just like they did in 2016. What I'm really interested in is the independent swing voters. And actually, there's some evidence to suggest from polling that this is very low on their list of priorities, swing voters. They're not very much tuned into it. They care more about issues like the economy, national security, education, immigration, crime in particular. And so there is some evidence that compared to the other many criminal charges Trump is facing, this set of charges is the least serious, and voters do distinguish between this case and other cases like the Mar-a-Lago documents case or like the election fraud cases.
Lauren Wright, good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Likewise. Thank you.
Now, Israel's far-right Interior Minister has condemned President Biden's decision not to supply US munitions that could be used in a major Israeli assault on the city of Rafah. Itamar Ben-Gvir wrote on X, "Hamas loves Biden." The British Foreign Secretary David Cameron has said the UK is opposed to a military operation in Rafah, but is unlikely to follow America in delaying arms sales to Israel. A senior Hamas official has said Israel's operations in Rafah and its seizure of the border crossing there are meant to derail peace efforts. The group's delegation to the Cairo ceasefire talks has left for Doha, but have stressed they are committed to reaching a deal. Yolan Nell reports now from Jerusalem.
Bloody and in pain. Children were among 25 wounded by Israeli shelling in one neighbourhood in the heart of Rafah. 7 corpses were pulled from the rubble in the west of the city.
They said to evacuate the eastern areas and that the western area is safe. This is proof that the Israeli occupation is a liar. There is no safe place.
But Israel's military still insists it's carrying out a limited operation against Hamas battalions hiding out in Gaza's southernmost city. And the US, Israel's closest ally, has given its starkest warning yet of the consequences if it goes for a full-scale ground offensive.
I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah.
earlier in the war, powerful explosives caused massive death and destruction. The US is now holding back a shipment of thousands of its large bombs. Very disappointing, one Israeli official said. Israel will continue to fight Hamas until its destruction, insisted the foreign minister. And a far-right minister suggested the US president was helping Israel's enemies.
The US fears that if Israel goes ahead with a full invasion of Rafah, there will be carnage. Already there's fear and panic, with tens of thousands of people fleeing, and fuel and food are quickly running out.
While Israel's reopened a main entry point for aid, the UN says it's not been safe enough to collect supplies. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is in another downward spiral. Yolanda Nell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, I'm joined now by Josh Paul, who resigned from the US State Department due to his disagreement with the Biden administration's decision to rush lethal military assistance to Israel in the context of its war on Gaza. Thank you for your time today. Hasn't President Biden undermined this urgent push for a ceasefire by undercutting the US support for Israel?
No, I think President Biden has made it clear that the US does not support further slaughter, does not support a major operation by Israel into Rafah, where there are over 1 million refugees huddled in tents. I think that message is very clear. I think that message now has to be applied more broadly to Israel's operations in Gaza and to the need for humanitarian assistance.
I mean, Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, has told Israeli radio that the decision could threaten Israel's efforts to eliminate Hamas, and they are very disappointed at the US position. And given the precariousness of talks right now and the precariousness of Netanyahu's own position, where he's facing such pressure from the right, isn't this a misstep by President Biden, regardless in a way of the pressure that he's facing internally within the US too?
So I think, first of all, that Ambassador Erdan's comments are absurd on two bases. First of all, because Israel has every military capability to continue its operation if it chooses to. It has deep stockpiles that the US has been feeding for over 7 months on a daily basis. It's also simply not the case that a military operation will defeat what is ultimately a political movement. There needs to be a political process here. So I think that there is, on both of those grounds, just a complete misstatement of the facts in this case.
When you look at what's happening right now today, with some operations obviously having started in Rafah, what is your reading of the situation? Do you think Israel is just threatening to go in a full-scale way, or is it really possible?
Well, I certainly think it's possible, and both Prime Minister Netanyahu and certain elements of his war cabinet have said that they wish to go forward with this operation. I think what the US is doing, what President Biden is doing with this suspension of transfers of bombs, is sending them a message, signaling and advising them not to. I hope that they follow that advice, both for the interests of the peace process that you were mentioning, and frankly of the hostages as well. If the rescue of the hostages is truly a priority, then what we need is negotiations, not a bombing of the place where the hostages, to the best of our knowledge, are actually being kept.
If Netanyahu does go ahead with an assault on Rafah, what does the US do then? Has it lost all its leverage effectively?
No, the US has plenty of leverage here. And of course, first of all, the longer a pause on shipments of arms lasts, and I hope it will last significant amounts of time, the more sway it will have over the government of Israel as they are forced to make ever tougher choices about where their priorities actually lie, and if they can continue to destroy Gaza at the scope and scale that they have been doing so up to this point. I think the US also has other forms of leverage. We have diplomatic leverage at the United Nations, which we could be using more effectively. And of course, the US is also at this point working to limit routes to judicial accountability for Israeli officials involved in what are plausibly war crimes. So there are all sorts of forms of leverage that the United States has here that it could continue to employ.
If it does actually continue to pause weapons supplies, how does it distinguish between, offensive weapons, defensive, supplies to the Iron Dome, intelligence links? I mean, there are so many levels, aren't there, in which the US can step up pressure. How do you see that unfolding? And at what point does Israel really feel the heat on that?
No, there are, and you've identified several of them. I think President Biden has been clear that he has no intention to limit missile defense systems such as Iron Dome support. At the same time, there are bombs and weapons that we know have caused an immense number of civilian casualties in Gaza, such as the 2,000-pound bombs, the 500-pound bombs that are currently being paused. I would suggest that that pause might also consider firearms, where we have seen increased use of the IDF of American origin firearms, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, in what appear to be extrajudicial killings, including in incidents of a child waving a white flag. So I think the US can select what arms are causing the harm here and send a very clear message to Israel by limiting those arms.
Josh Paul, former director at the US State Department, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We're going to take you to Malmö now in Sweden, where a Eurovision Song Contest semi-final is set to take place in just a few hours' time, and Israel is taking part. And as you can see, there are pro-Palestinian protests taking place, and smoke canisters in the colours of the Palestinian flag have been set off. Quite a crowd there. I'm joined by our correspondent Sarah Rainsford, who's in Malmö. Sarah, what's been happening in the last few minutes?
Well, yeah, you can see the crowd here. In fact, this is the tail end of the demonstration here. People have been gathering over the past hour or so. Just let you have a look at what's happening now. People just starting to march off through the centre of Malmö. Lots and lots of Palestinian flags, of course, and lots of chants about what's happening in Gaza in particular, but also focused on the Eurovision Song Contest, of course, which is taking place here. It's the second semi-final here today, and lots of people are very angry that Israel has been allowed to take part. There's been shouts here for a boycott of Eurovision by other artists who are taking part in the competition, but also for Israel itself to be banned from the competition. There are all sorts of groups here. I've seen queers for Palestine, I've seen Latinos for Palestine, I've seen communists for Palestine. Lots and lots of people represented. Lots of children here too, families coming out, children in pushchairs. It's extremely peaceful. This is an authorised march. There are a lot of police in town. They're standing by at the edge of the protest for now. There have been reinforcements brought into Malmö for Eurovision because, of course, there have been security concerns. So extra police drafted in from Norway and from Denmark too. But everything here calm and peaceful, but the anger is strong. People are furious that whilst Russia was banned from Eurovision after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, that Israel has been allowed to take part. Eurovision says it's not a political contest and that Israel has every right to be there. People here are not at all happy about that.
Sarah Rainsford in Malmö, thank you very much indeed. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Now, a former Saudi intelligence officer has told the BBC that the kingdom's authorities have permitted the use of lethal force to clear land for a futuristic eco-city in the desert. Dozens of Western companies are involved in the building of the $500 billion NEOM scheme in the northwest of the country. With more on this story, let's cross to our team at the BBC Verify. Our correspondent Merlin Thomas has been looking into those claims. Merlin.
This is part of NEOM, Saudi Arabia's grand plan to transform the country and its image. It's a project almost the size of Belgium, with companies from all over the world building it. At its heart is the Line, a city carved from the desert in a 100-mile straight line. But it's come at a price. Thousands of people lived near the Line. For years, they objected to being moved, but the project still went ahead. We spoke to a former Saudi intelligence officer, now exiled in Britain, who says he was given orders to clear one of the villages for the project in 2020. Now, he said the order licensed him to use lethal force against whoever stayed in their homes. He says he dodged the mission, which went ahead without him. This is the aftermath. Walls littered with bullet holes. This man, Abdurrahim al-Hawaiti, refused to leave his home. Saudi forces shot him dead. In the months leading up to his death, he posted multiple videos on social media protesting the evictions. The Saudi government says he was an armed terrorist. The UN and human rights groups say he was killed for refusing eviction. 40 people from 3 villages remain detained after objecting to the evictions, according to human rights group Al-Qasd. Now, these 3 men are now on death row facing terrorism charges. And villages have been destroyed. The Saudi government says more than 6,000 people charges. And villages have been destroyed. The Saudi government says more than 6,000 people have been moved, but critics say this is likely to be a conservative figure. This is Sharma, one of the villages back in 2018, and you can see that it's almost completely been wiped off the map. Homes, schools, hospitals, cleared off the map. Now, this was over 8 kilometers away from the planned area for the line. And this is a satellite image of the line. It was pitched as a car-free city as part of the NEOM project. It's 170 kilometers long, though now only 2.54 kilometers is reportedly expected to be completed by 2030. And it's planned to be 200 meters wide and 500 meters tall. So to put that into perspective, that's taller than the Empire State Building, the Eiffel Tower, and Big Ben. Now, Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, wants NEOM to be his legacy, a shining jewel in the desert. Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, wants NEOM to be his legacy, a shining jewel in the desert. But critics say the project has cost some Saudis their freedom and their lives.
Merlin Thomas, BBC Verify, thank you. Now, President Xi Jinping of China has been greeted with a military parade in Budapest during a visit to Hungary. It is the latest location of his European tour after visiting France and Serbia. Later, he'll meet the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. Beijing sees Hungary as one of its closest allies in the EU, and there have been high levels of Chinese investment there. Let's speak to Charles Parton, who's a former Chinese diplomat and Associate Fellow at the Council of Geostrategy. Thank you for your time today. What do both China and Hungary want from this alliance? What do they both get out of it?
Well, it's the 75th anniversary of the establishment of relations between the 2 countries, so they certainly want to celebrate that. Hungary is the biggest destination of Chinese investment in Central and Eastern Europe, so I think they want more of that. They want more trade, obviously. Celebrate the building of the railroad from Budapest from Belgrade to Budapest. That's sort of on the surface, but I think you also need to look underneath that at what the aims of Xi Jinping in particular are, and I would characterize those as in trying to drive a wedge between Europe and the US, and Hungary and Serbia in particular have been much more friendly to the Chinese than other European countries. I think they're trying. Xi Jinping is always China is always quite keen to weaken the unity within Europe, much as it likes to say it wants a strong Europe. Actually, it's very much in its interest that they don't get together, particularly on issues like subsidies, investigations, and possible blocking moves on some of China's exporting of its overcapacity industries to Europe. And I think Xi Jinping also wants to encourage any blunting of criticism of China's support for Russia in the war. So Serbia, a close ally of Russia, and Hungary, someone that's always been a country that's always been close to China and always willing to support them where they can. And let's not forget that the 2 leaders that attended the Belt and Road Initiative in China back in there's a big sort of forum back in October last year, and only 2 European leaders turned up. Well, guess who they were? They were from Serbia and Hungary. So it's close relationships, and as ever, China, the Chinese leadership likes to show its own people, its leader being feted and honoured around the world and bestriding the world stage as an underlining of just how important he is and China now is.
And what came out of the French visit with President Xi, and how does that, play into what we're seeing here today in Hungary?
Well, I think some of those same aims were at play there. France has always pursued a fairly independent foreign policy line, and Xi Jinping would like to encourage that so that it's not close to America. He keeps talking about a multipolar world, i.e. one in which America doesn't dominate, and he wants to push that line too. France has been one of the countries within Europe that's actually been more supportive of the European Commission in investigating, particularly in the automotive industry, the sort of subsidies that are likely to cause real problems to the European automotive industry. And I expect that part of Xi Jinping's reason for going to France, which also incidentally it was the 60th anniversary, so there's a good overt reason for going, 60th anniversary of their forming relations. But part of the reason would be to try and blunt the French support for the European Commission over these subsidy investigations, which are gathering pace both in their depth and in the breadth of things that are being investigated.
Charles Pardon, thank you very much indeed there from the Council on Geostrategy. Thank you. Just let me show you some pictures from Malmö in Sweden. There were some quite dramatic pictures just a few seconds ago, but there are protests, pro-Palestinian protests in Malmö in Sweden because a Eurovision Song Contest semi-final is due to take place in the next few hours. Israel are, of course, taking part, and as you can see, those protesters are out on the streets. We heard from Sarah Rainsford, our correspondent there, that it's been basically peaceful with sort of families out there. You can see youngsters out there too, but we did just see smoke flag, and we know that this whole event has obviously come under scrutiny and under fire, given Israel's taking part in this. Eurovision, obviously designed as a music event, but politics, global politics, of course, never able to be fully excluded, and those are the people on the streets there in Sweden, as you can see. Do stay with us. This is BBC News. We're back for more in the next 5 minutes. I'm Geeta, Guru-Murthy.
Whether you're in